Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Happy Wednesday to you all. We have made it to the middle of the week. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you yet again for tuning in. In today's show, we're continuing the narrative of doing deep dives into certain position groups around the NFL, especially at contentious positions where you might be making last-second decisions concerning your fantasy football teams, and maybe if you haven't already drafted yet, maybe preparing for that as well. So we'll be doing those deep dives to maybe help you ascertain some of your final picks and additions to your squad. We'll start off in the AFC with perhaps the most explosive wide receiver core in the AFC and the Chiefs. Then we transition to the youngest, perhaps the deepest in terms of its youth, in the Packers. And then we look at the Seattle Seahawks, one of my favorite receiving cores in the NFC and in the entire NFL because of my fandom for them. Then the Texans, another interesting wide receiver group. Well, with the addition of a very, not necessarily controversial star, but someone who definitely brings a lot of tension with him. And then we finish off actually with an injury update and the fantasy implications surrounding the injury with one of the more exciting young rookie running backs in the league, out now on the PUP list. But before we get into any of those segments, I do want to remind you that yet again, now that we are a live show, there are so many more ways and features that get you involved with the show, and we want your involvement in the show. We want your interaction in the show. That's what has made this show so special as we have made this transition to live streaming. So, avail yourselves to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers. Tips and donations are all combined with that. It's a huge support not only to me and my fellow podcasters, but to the network as a whole. I guarantee you everything you do for the network and the show is greatly appreciated. I will read all your questions, comments, concerns, whether you have any of them, and leave them in the comments for me, because I truly believe that this show is better because of you watching, my faithful audience. I love talking to you guys, so please don't hesitate to leave any comments, tips, or donations, what have you, in the comments section. Without further ado, let us jump into today's show, staying with this graphic and talking about a very interesting wide receiver group, a very talented wide receiver group, but maybe a little bit of internal and external issues and extra baggage that they carry with them, and that is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, the reason why the Kansas City Chiefs is going to be a heavily scrutinized group, especially in fantasy terms and for fantasy purposes, is because of the excitement surrounding it. I think that this on paper translates to be one of the more exciting rosters, especially because of the ways that Coach Andy Reid can now utilize all of these players for his squad, especially with the addition of the speedsters, Xavier Worthy through the draft, and Marquise Brown through acquisition from the Arizona Cardinals. So this group has just become kind of almost like a playground football style group. You have Rashee Rice in his second year, becoming quickly one of Patrick Mahomes' favorite targets. But overall, with the addition of Brown Worthy, that's where the Chiefs really wanted to focus on, getting back to utilizing speed at the wide receiver position to better gain advantages over opposing defenses. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about all of these and what to make of the excitement surrounding this Chiefs wide receiver room. Now let's start off with the guy who has been in this wide receiver room, albeit for only 1 year. Let's go to the end here. Rashee Rice. And I like Rashee Rice a lot because he's one of those receivers who's just very reliable. He made himself available for Patrick Mahomes, especially in the playoffs when the Chiefs looked really down and out, when they needed a wide receiver to step up and truly kind of quiet the noise surrounding what was going on with the wide receiver rooms in terms of disconnection with Mahomes, and he really made himself available. But I still think the caveat is I don't necessarily know if he's that focused. Maybe some external issues that I won't necessarily touch on. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is, now that Brown and Worthy are in this squad, you can't lose sight of what you were developing with Patrick Mahomes toward the end of the season. Because let's talk about Rice in terms of fantasy. 212.5 fantasy points. He had 7 top 25 positional weekly scores. As Easy B says, do you have experience in dynasty leagues in fantasy football? I'm not necessarily too familiar with dynasty leagues and how they lay out, but I think that in terms of different leagues, I definitely would like to get into dynasty leagues the most to see what they are all about, because I just like playing standard leagues, maybe even some PPR leagues, but dynasty leagues have always intrigued me because you get to utilize a lot more options. So while I can't necessarily help you if you are in a dynasty league, Easy B, I'm sorry about that. I still think that I will want to gain experience going forward in dynasty league because they're very exciting. And maybe these Chiefs wide receivers can help you in some regard in dynasty leagues, but with all the positions that you can utilize in a dynasty league. Let's go back to Rashee Rice especially, because he is someone, like I said, who I want to see maintain it. It's all about self-awareness as well, now that this wide receiver core is deeper. He's also the wide receiver 8 in the final 7 weeks of last season. So as you can see, as the season progressed, as he got more comfortable, he grew. But like I said, external off-the-field issues may be coming into play here. And also, who knows, now that the Chiefs got the guys they presumptively wanted, how he will fit into this offense. He still, at the end of the day, is the most reliable weapon that Patrick Mahomes has outside of Travis Kelce because of their experience together in that 1 year. But he still is someone who I might have to wait upon. Now let's talk about a guy in Xavier Worthy who's coming into the league, the fastest 40 time in combine history. Always talked about in terms of speed, kind of like the gadget guy. But the big question about him, and me being a Texas fan should, help me try and understand how the Chiefs will utilize him, is what role, as we go back in this graphic here, will Worthy play? Because he could potentially be a big star for the Kansas City Chiefs. That's what they expect him to be. They expect him to kind of play the role that Tyreek Hill vacated, really, when he left Kansas City. And so I don't necessarily know if he can encompass every single facet of what the Chiefs want him to do. But that being said, he is very talented. At Texas, he averaged 7.7 yards after catch. So we do know that when he gets the ball, he can be very explosive and dynamic down the field. He's a very interesting vertical threat as well. He did have a lot of drops, kind of made up for it in his last year in Texas, but it could be a concern, and it could be a concern as he's worked into this offense because of the, remember, frustration Patrick Mahomes had at the nascent stages of last year when he had similar issues with Rashee Rice and the drops that he had. So working Xavier Worthy into this offense will be the hugest X factor because he's going to be talked about a lot in fantasy football circles, a lot in terms of different leagues as well, like Easy B alluded to. And so I think the role Worthy plays in this offense is integral to how people might view it in terms of who to take in fantasy. Because Xavier Worthy could profile to be, at the very least this year, a tier 4 wide receiver who you might want to take a flyer on in the latter rounds. And so he's someone who you might want to keep an eye out for as well if he has gone and drafted in your fantasy league, and you might want to stream him. So it all depends on a week-by-week basis how Andy Reid utilizes this kind of gadget guy. Because as a Texas fan, I can tell you, he's not just all 4-2-1 speed. He can route run. He's excellent in the red zone at diagnosing coverages. And he's fascinating because of that speed, not in spite of it. So if you are interested in Xavier Worthy, do be sure to do your research on him because he can be a help to you, he can be a boon to you, or week by week you may have to sit him sometimes and wait and see how he plays out in this Chiefs offense. But then the addition of Marquise Brown is a very interesting one because now you have two guys with very similar profiles. And these two guys both are seen as more of vertical threats than you might want in a traditional three receiver set here. Because I know Rashee Rice is a good route runner. In fact, it was his route running abilities that perhaps helped the Chiefs win the Super Bowl. Very vital in that overtime drive for them in key third down situations with his route running abilities. Can Andy Reid make this offense even more unpredictable by allowing, say, Xavier Worthy, who I think might just be the better route runner, even though he is inexperienced in NFL play, to be kind of that gadget guy? Get him going and say reverses or jet sweeps or little wheel routes or something like that, like they did at Texas, where they utilized his speed to great effect. Because the reason why I'm saying that is if you view Worthy as someone who can just go deep, more like a Tyreek Hill, then I don't think you're using him to the best of his abilities. Because, as we've seen with speedy receivers in the past, outside of Tyreek Hill, with, say, John Ross, who first set the 40 record in the Combine, he did not pan out in the NFL because nobody knew what to do with him. Nobody knew what to do at that level of speed, and they didn't necessarily view him as someone who could be a solid route runner, so they just said, hey, I'm going to throw you on the field, maybe your speed will win on some occasions. But that's not the case with Xavier Worthy. That's why the most important question about these Chiefs is their offensive structure. But overall, the makeup of this wide receiver room is one that should intrigue a lot of people and fascinate a lot of people in terms of fantasy. There might not be one guy who separates himself as the fantasy player to have. I mean, I have Rice right now on my bench. I might not even use him for large swaths of the season. But at the end of the day, it's all going to come down to utilization, because it's now a very interesting offense where you now reincorporate the speed that you feel like you were missing with these two guys. And now it's up to how that plays out on the field. Because on paper, it's a really fascinating wide receiver room. But on the field, it could all come falling down. But it's up to you guys to try for that. Let me know what you think about this wide receiver room in the comments. But I'll just about do it for this segment. Coming up next on today's show, we are going to take another examination of a young, deep, very, very intriguing, contentious wide receiver room in the Green Bay Packers right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.